Mueliso Coulihan, and I will be moderating the session this evening. Delighted to introduce the panelists that are with us, and we may also have one additional panelist if if this Wi-Fi issue can be sorted out. So this evening, the topic for our discussion is Ireland's air capability, and we have three excellent and maybe hopefully four panelists this evening, all of whom are very experienced in the space and have a lot of expertise between them. So hopefully looking forward to another stimulating discussion, which we are recording, and hopefully we'll be able to, the recording goes well, we'll be able to share later on our YouTube channel. Just one or two logistical points. There is a Q&A functionality, so people feel free to ask questions as we go through, and we will take questions later. So the format is that I will invite each of the panelists to give some remarks, make remarks of about 8 to 10 minutes on their perspective of the topic this evening, and then we'll move to the questions and answers, and we'll conclude with concluding remarks from each of the panelists before we finish, no later than 8:30 this evening. So our first panelist this evening is Frank Ledgwidge. We're delighted to have Frank join us tonight from Portsmouth. Frank is a senior lecturer and has, as I scroll here, has worked as a barrister before spending several years as a military intelligence officer and government official, serving in all of Britain's major conflicts. He also worked for 8 years as a human rights lawyer in the Balkans and former Soviet Union. For the last 6 years, he has taught at the Royal Air Force College and is the author of several books, including Losing Small Wars, published by Yale in 2011 and 17, and Aerial Warfare, published by Oxford in 2020. Frank has strong Irish connections and holds Irish citizenship. And we'll talk this evening about the need for a coherent and realistic strategy about how Ireland sees defence. And also, talking about the serious and realistic contribution to regional security. The options that may be available for an Irish quick response capability and contribution to air defence, and we'll address some of the more potentially attractive options, and a further option that would be the cheapest and most effective if the objective is security of Ireland's airspace. We'll also talk about any form of air defence arrangement, that any form of air defence arrangement implies creating or being part of an integrated system. And if time permits, we'll touch on maritime patrol. So Frank, I'd invite you now to talk. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. This is it's great. So I'll get straight into it. I won't say anything about strategic priorities, really. I think you're all over that and way ahead of me on the way Ireland's thinking about strategy. But certainly we'll come to it in the conversation. We'll make observations, though, at the conceptual level, that Ireland holds a large proportion of the western flank, I won't say of NATO, but of Europe. But in the same way, Sweden and Finland do the same in the east. And the thing you have in common, fairly small countries in terms of population, wealthy countries, and in the case of Sweden and Finland, very well-armed countries. But those are nefarious comparisons to some degree. But even Switzerland, during the Cold War, is said to have had an agreement with NATO to support the Central Front. So, in other words, the point I'm making is neutral countries don't need to be lightly armed. But I'll leave that there. I won't get involved with that. That's for the highest levels of government to sort out, because of the levels of investment and so forth. And those priorities clearly need to be set first. So I'll go straight into Ireland's air defence and the options that I see, or some of the options that I see might be available to you, stroke us. And the other guys, I think, are far more better qualified than I am to talk about some of the technological issues and issues of avionics or even airframes. But anyway, look, these are my ideas. So the first thing I'd like to say is if Ireland is serious about having a sovereign QRA, quick reaction alert capability, that's having a pair of fighters essentially on standby to drive off intruders from whatever country wishes to intrude in your airspace. And we all know who that is. France, no, not France. There are several options. And I think the first thing to knock out is, I'm not even sure that this has been put forward, the idea of cheap and cheerful supersonic aircraft such as Korea's F-50. Now, they're deceptively cheap, small production runs, and unproven. You might always also consider F-16s, but they're likely to be second-hand, although the Israelis do produce some good ones with a bit cut price. And there's always the option to do what Bulgaria did, of making your own F-16s. For they're building 8, but the figure's pretty high. It's $500 million they're spending on that. New Zealand considered that option, but it was very expensive and cancelled it. Now, there are some second-hand Eurofighters on the market too, very high quality, exquisite fighters. They're, of course, the main capability for air defense for the RAF, the Italians, the Spanish, and the Germans, amongst others, including some smaller operators. And that would offer the potential for some synergies, of course, with the RAF, who take care of the Northwest Europe's quick reaction alert along with Norway and to some extent Denmark now. But there are also the options, should you wish to go that way, and I'm not going to go through lists, and we can do that if anyone's interested, for used Rafales. I've already mentioned the Israeli F-16s, and I said the second-hand US ones. I'd just like to just touch for 1 minute on, because this will come up later, just in a couple of minutes' time. I hopefully won't go over my time. I'm conscious of it. It's worth saying that the New Zealand, which is an island nation with a very large and powerful, very powerful neighbour, cancelled its fast jet capability because, of course, Australia, the threats are limited for New Zealand, but Australia, their obvious partners, has a very strong air defence capability and take care of that space. But the strongest suggestion, if you want a sovereign capability, I think for me, would take the form of 12 to 14 Gripen, Saab Gripen fighters. You know about those, I think, a very capable Swedish model. And that's the choice made by countries such as Czech Republic, Hungary, seriously considered by Slovakia too. I think they're announcing theirs, by Croatia announcing theirs soon, I think. And it works out at about 120 million euros per annum, but for that you get a full package. And again, the other guys will be able to fill that out if anybody's interested. You'd need a cadre, though, to build a cadre of 30 to 40 fast jet pilots and considerably more ground crew and staff. It won't come cheap. Now, we're setting up the infrastructure. Of course, you need a whole integrated air defense system. If you're going to have a QRA, you need the system. But I've spoken to a fair few RAF air defense professionals in the last few weeks who tell me that systems that are currently in place could take care of much of the military requirement for an early warning system. You wouldn't need too much investment, but you would need some. It also, of course, needless to say, building this kind of capability, provided it can be funded, would be a superb recruiting asset, I'd say. And you could also poach Irish RAF pilots, although to be fair, I've worked in the RAF training system now for about 10 years and not too many around. All right, so the second option, which I put forward broadly, is a joint capability with the UK Royal Air Force, who already have their Queen Quick Reaction Alert in Scotland and Eastern England. The way I would propose that would be, and this is early thoughts, it's just brainstorming in a sense, but to have Irish, perhaps even a joint Irish-UK squadron. You might base it probably at Lossiemouth. These would operate and do operate Tranche 1 Typhoons. And I would suggest that kind of arrangement, if it can be politically made to work, would be at least enough to build up a seed corn capability. And if it were made to work properly, it could answer Ireland's needs for if not a sovereign quick reaction alert or air defense capability, then certainly an effective one. Obviously, there'd be political sensitivities, there'd be the issues of chains of command, rules of engagement. Those could be ironed out, I've no doubt about that. And there you'd have a situation, unlike now, which is essentially dependency, you'd have partnership. I can't see any other country agreeing to any form of joint agreement. France and the US, the Netherlands are all, well, I don't know about the Netherlands, France certainly has said no. They say, well, look, you've got the British next to you, what's wrong with that? Best equipped Air Force, certainly in Europe, and one of those best in the world. And so I won't scope out these issues in detail because perhaps there'll be no interest for it. So it's all a matter of negotiation as well. But I'm 100% sure 95% sure, I think, that the Brits and the Royal Air Force would find this arrangement of perhaps a joint squadron. They've already got joint squadrons, by the way, but they find that congenial. I'm going to leave my suggestions there, really, as I said, conscious of time. I just want one other thought, though. There is, of course, a defence committee or commission, as I understand it, being developed now. And I would suggest that it would be essential, given the level of investment, that whatever option you take, if any, would imply a subcommittee on the official commission on the future of defence, on air defence, or indeed Ireland's air capability as a whole, but this would be probably the most expensive element, is absolutely essential. And it could also provide a role for civil society, think tanks, or indeed academia, towards producing a report on that. I think that should be the next step. So that is, Moelisa, all from me for the moment. And let's see what the other guys say. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Dr. Kyriakos Kourousis, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Engineering at the University of Limerick, where he is also the director of the undergraduate and postgraduate programs in airworthiness. He holds a BSc Honours in Aeronautical Engineering from the Hellenic Air Force Academy and an MSc and PhD in Solid Mechanics, both from the National Technical University of Athens. With 20 years of professional and research experience in the fields of airworthiness, metal plasticity, and additive manufacturing, both as an aeronautical engineer and university faculty in Ireland and Australia. He has extensive experience in fighter aircraft maintenance, airworthiness, and structural integrity management, having spent 12 years in the Hellenic Air Force as an aeronautical engineering officer, where he specialized on the Mirage 2000. He is currently a major of the Reserve Force. A chartered engineer, he is a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society and is also chair of the Royal Aeronautical Society's Airworthiness and Maintenance Specialist Group and a professional member of the International Federation of Airworthiness. So, Kyriakos, I'm going to hand over to you, who will talk about the technical, i.e. maintenance engineering side of running the Irish Air Corps. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you again for the invitation from the Irish Defence Force Officers Club to talk about this interesting topic, I think. So, air defence and so air defence, just to clarify, it covers also the means to deter any aircraft. Apart from the Air Force, for example, the aircraft means, there may be some other element, radars or other elements which also have to be discussed at some point. I'm not an expert in this area, but I mentioned that because we're talking about air defense, and air defense in general covers these aspects, and that's a very important capability as well, apart from the aircraft themselves. So as per my expertise and my experience, I will talk about the technical issues. I think these are important because most of the cost comes from the technical matters, both in terms of the acquisition contracts, because engineering is a major part of that, and every capability that you introduce and you're trying to acquire through an aircraft in practice means that you have to embed a number of different systems, and systems have to be maintained and have to be upgraded. So there is a cost involved in there. And the other part, of course, is the maintenance part of that, which also includes sustainment. And sustainment is a broader term. So when you have to sustain a fleet, you have to make sure that this fleet remains operational at the right level for a number of years, maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. So we have these cases as well. So we have aircraft which are flying for close to 50 years, especially transport aircraft. In terms of the current situation of the Irish Air Corps, one can easily see that there is a mix of roles and a mix of aircraft that have to be operated. So this presents some challenges, but given the magnitude of the force, one can say that the organization is very well known to each other. So you don't have a complex organization like the RAF or some other defense forces, which are broken into several departments, several different sub-organizations, and they have to communicate. And when you have to communicate, then you introduce a lot of complexity. So in that regards, the size in conjunction with the different roles may balance each other. On the other side, and I'm talking about my previous work I have done before, some external evaluation of the regulatory system of the Irish Air Corps, I have seen that there is a need for standardization, for example. So that's something which has to be addressed. If we are looking for the future, standardization is the key word. I was reading yesterday, there is a forum which has been organized and has been set up by the European Defence Agency, is going to treat standardization. And guess what? Aviation is one of the things that they are looking to address across the EU level. One other thing which offers an opportunity for improvement is efficiency, how aircraft can be maintained in the best possible way, how the budget can be allocated in the right places at the right time. So efficiency is something that any segment of the public sector may have to rethink, especially when you have to handle a budget at that level. So there are two areas I would like to focus. Again, regulation is important, because out of regulation, and you have to remember that aviation is a very technical part of the defense force. You have to deal with aircraft, you have to deal with certified staff across the range of operations, maintenance, even logistics. So everyone has to be trained and certified, that they have to retain their certification throughout their career. So that means that they are governed by a set of rules and regulations, and this set of rules and regulations are imposing cost. Okay, so effectively there is the old school where all these regulations appear to be fragmented, and they resemble more or less regulations and rules that we find in non-aviation defense organizations. But nowadays there is a move towards a more civil aviation regulation, and this offers opportunities for synergies and for lending knowledge and getting the best out of the civil sector. There is the European Military Airworthiness Requirements, which has been an initiative by the EDA. It's more than 10 years now, and most of the EU states have aligned to this set of regulations, and that allowed intercommunication between the states, certification of new products and products either in the form of modifying aircraft or new aircraft platforms like the A400 and some other aircraft, for example. So this is something that needs to be addressed because it's coming up as a requirement. Okay. I understand that there is a lot of discussion around the new fighter aircraft and the potential acquisition of such a capability, which would be a totally new capability based on the current situation for the Irish Air Corps. Currently, the Irish Air Corps is doing the advanced training for pilots that are going to be transitioning to helicopters or transport aircraft or surveillance aircraft, for example, but they don't end up to military aircraft. So that's one of the elements. So I'm not someone who is going to talk too much about this pilot training, but if you are building up your fighter capability, you have to also scale up in the training part as well. Okay. The aircraft type, the contract type in terms of acquisition and follow-on support, sustainment, what kind of, if you're looking for a single engine aircraft or a dual engine aircraft, that's something that has to be decided, have to be discussed at the government level. It really depends on how much deterrence you need to have, how much independence you need to have as a defense force. Okay. If you are looking for cheap solutions, you are going to get, something which is not very scary for anyone who would like to fly over Ireland or to do whatever they wish to do. A new fighter or any new aircraft, because I'm not going to focus only on the new fighter, because there is an acquisition for new transport aircraft, military transport aircraft, will offer some opportunities for the industry. Any acquisition, any investment in such a defense capability would have to lead in some local development in terms of new companies that may be doing some manufacturing or some repairs under license from the OEMs. So there is a new ecosystem which may arise out of the acquisition of new aircraft, and the government may have to consider that because this will lead to job creation. Of course, there may be also opportunity for R&D capability companies that are doing development of new products, not necessarily products that are going to lead to ammunition or something which is considered as as a defense equipment. So there are a lot of dual purpose or technology that can be used both for civil and military purposes. So there will be activity which is going to be beneficial, and it's not going to become very detrimental to the neutrality nature and to the neutrality policy of Ireland. So in short, I would say all this have to be considered. And I don't have the answers, as no one has answers, I think. There should be some high level and mid-level and lower level set of committees that have to assess that. Due to the complexity of the issue, no one is an expert in across the board. You may have a pilot or an engineer or a logistics officer. So if you have one person, supervising all three of these categories, this person wouldn't be, it's in existence today. Okay, so that's why you have to form separate levels of committees and working groups that are going to examine this. So more or less, these are my questions, and I thought that would be useful to share it at this point.
Thank you, Kyriakos. That's excellent and a different perspective again. So our third panelist is Niall Connors. Niall is a former Air Corps Lieutenant Colonel, a member of the 63rd Cadet Class, who has served in numerous appointments both in command and staff before retiring in January 2014. He has completed overseas deployments in Afghanistan and Cote d'Ivoire, and as an operational Air Corps pilot has held ratings as an aircraft captain, type rating instructor, and type rating examiner on several fixed wing types. He joined the Irish Aviation Authority as a flight operations inspector in 2014, and since 2016 has been an assistant director within the Safety Regulation Division, leading a multidisciplinary team. From a broader education perspective, he's a member of the Institute of International and European Affairs, the Economic and Social Research Institute, and is a doctoral graduate of the University of Nottingham, holding a BSc and MA degrees in leadership disciplines as well, and a postgraduate diploma in aviation, leasing, finance, etc. He has completed the NTSB's Air Accident Investigators Program at the George Washington University in Washington, DC. He also lectures on the MSc in Aviation Leadership Program in DCU Business School. So Niall is going to talk about strategic security context and the positioning of the proposed Commission on the Defence Forces, the socio-economic context, and how air capability can add value, and potential air capability opportunities and potential challenges. So Niall, over to you.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Evening all. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this evening's conversation centered on Ireland's air capability. And again, as we all know, it's set against the backdrop of the proposed Commission on Defence. And from my own perspective, again, just the old caveat about them. And yeah, I suppose those that are interested will know that at the end of July of this year, the European Commission set out what they called the new security strategy for the period from 2020 up to 2025. And they focused on a number of areas where they felt that the EU could bring value to support member states in fostering security for everyone who lives in Europe. So they broke it down into 4 strategic priorities, really. Infrastructures online and offline, evolving threats with cybercrime, organised crime, including trafficking in humans and drugs, and then a strong European ecosystem. So again, normal enough stuff that you'd expect, but again, about fostering shared responsibility, common responsibility. But let's bring that then onto our island and ask ourselves a few questions like, what does it mean for us? How can we contribute? What about the defence forces? What are we here to defend? And in the context of the current programme for government, it mentions specifically the arrangements for the effective defence of the country at land, air and sea. But what does that mean? Like, we all understand what it means in the literal sense, but is there another reading of that that might contribute to unpacking the term defence, I suppose, in a way to facilitate a more comprehensive whole of government engagement, either with or support for the defence forces? So for example, if we frame it in the context of we're defending our economy, defending our natural resources, defending our peace building values, would that nudge a more cosmopolitan reading of defence rooted in this concept of good global citizenship? So why am I bringing that up? Well, you know, our Minister for Defence, Simon Coveney, holds a dual portfolio, as we know, with responsibilities as Minister for Foreign Affairs also. And it won't have been lost on people who've read the document, I'm sure, that the current programme for government positions the proposed Commission on the Defence Forces in a chapter called At the Heart of Europe and Global Citizenship. So this philosophy of good global citizenship repeatedly informs state policy documents such as Global Ireland, A Better World, Global Ireland 2025, etc. And underneath that, the values of empathy, partnership, independence, they form the basis of Ireland's recent successful campaign to be elected to the UN Security Council. So in that context then, what might air capability look like as we look into the future? So if we look first of all at the kind of strategic socio-economic environment. So as a peripheral nation at the edge of Europe, Ireland, we're very much reliant on our sea lines of communication and air lines of communication for continued development. The security of those lines of communication and our sovereign airspace, they're central to our economic success. They give us global connectivity for our citizens, and they also facilitate exports and imports, and they attract foreign direct investment as a consequence then. So, broadly speaking, we're all familiar with the concept of the real map of Ireland, where there's a maritime territory that extends, far west out to almost 900,000 square kilometers. But a more relatable picture, if you like, is if you consider the economic exclusion zone. That goes from 12 nautical miles out to a distance of 200 nautical miles. And within that zone, then, the state has a number of sovereign rights and responsibilities, both in respect of natural resources, production of energy, the preservation of that environment, and other rights and duties under international law. But thinking in terms of the defence forces, then, how does the state project its authority into this environment? Michael McDowell recently spoke about the defence forces being the guarantors of the state's authority. And in this context, I would argue that, air power is an efficient and effective value proposition there. From an Air Corps perspective, long-range offshore patrols with aircraft that are equipped with sophisticated surveillance suites, they project the state's interests out to the edge of the EEZ. And because of that, then, they ensure that the state's interests are served and protected out there. But what does that really actually do? From a strategic defence perspective, they provide timely and accurate intelligence pictures, not only to defend our economic interests within the EEZ, but also to provide advanced intelligence on vessels approaching the periphery of Europe offshore. They provide information on platforms that are working out there, safe passage of tankers. They advise in terms of the marine environment and pollution control, and also, our ecosystem responsibilities as European citizens in terms of logging data on large mammals, for example, that kind of stuff that's going on out there. But given the reach and familiarity with the offshore environment, the Air Corps also have a significant role to play then in any future SAR contract. Those aircraft and the capability to get out on scene at the very edge of the EEZ, the ability to loiter out there, drop life rafts, function as the initial on-scene commander, and relay timely and accurate communications, navigation, and weather data to both ships and other aircraft who are en route to the scene are invaluable resources in any emerging crisis situation. And while the recently purchased 295s will add significantly to the state's air capability offshore, there's a compelling case, I would argue, to retain the existing CASA 235 aircraft to leverage this experience to make a tangible contribution to other missions overseas. So what does that mean? Again, the programme for government talks about Europe's wider neighbourhood, Ireland as an island at the centre of the world, and Ireland being ambitious, visible, and active in promoting the interests of our nation on the international stage. Op Atalanta, for example, is a high-profile EU counter-piracy mission in the Horn of Africa, and that's conducted, most importantly, under the UN Security Council resolutions. It was launched in 2008, but its mandate includes protecting World Food Programme vessels and monitoring fishing activity also. Spain and Germany currently supply fixed-wing aircraft to that mission in both the maritime and SAR roles. And again, to use the good global citizen narrative, can and should we consider contributing in that regard? Closer to home, Operini is in the Mediterranean, again, another CSDP mission focused on implementing UNSCRs through the arms embargo in Libya, and also the disruption of human smuggling and trafficking networks by using, again, aerial, satellite and maritime assets. Poland and Luxembourg, they supply turboprop aircraft to that mission in a maritime patrol role. And again, is this something Ireland could contribute to or should be considering contributing to? The next thing then is look at, say, Minister Coveney's wider responsibilities and the primacy of the UN as a cornerstone of Irish foreign policy. Increasingly, there's a more proactive role taken in regional peacekeeping and crisis management. And it's all about protecting or interdicting threats to security in Europe. That perspective is reflected in a number of high-level UN reports that were published recently. But the key question that they all find, or the weak spot in them, is slow deployment, self-sustainment, lack of air capability. So again, how can the Defence Forces leverage air capability to address this? And how can we fund it? Well, you know, wearing his foreign affairs hat, the minister has underlined that Ireland is committed to expanding the official development assistance, the ODA money, essentially, and making progress on delivering on the UN target of allocating 0.7% of gross national income for ODA by 2030. Just to get an impression what that means though, right? For 2021, the allocation of ODA as a percentage of gross national income came to 0.32%. Let's compare that to a defence budget allocation of 0.27% of GDP. Now, GNI and GDP are slightly different, but in terms of raw numbers, for 2020, as an example, the ODA commitment was 840 million. For 2020, the defence budget, when you hear a headline figure of over $1 billion, break it down, vote 36, which is the OPEX CAPEX piece, was actually only 780 million. Vote 35, 260 million was allocated towards pensions. What does that mean in terms of defence budget? Essentially, it's been falling gradually since 2009, when it stood at a high of 0.6% GDP. It's been under 0.3 for the last while. So are there synergies here? I suppose essentially with the government defence budget consistently less than the 0.3% GDP region and a stated commitment to increasing ODA, is there an opportunity there for the Air Corps to develop an air capability, but partly funded through ODA commitments? That kind of tactical airlift capability, if you like, would significantly enhance the Defence Forces contribution to the Irish aid piece, but more importantly, it would provide the state with global reach in terms of a national response to humanitarian disaster and potentially contribute to the security and logistical support of ongoing overseas missions. It would also enhance the Defence Forces capability for rapid deployment of, say, for example, anti-terrorist teams, as well as secure prisoner transfer flights or asylum repatriation flights on behalf of the Department of Justice. And scaling that up then, you know, we spoke earlier about agreements between different alliances, but there is an opportunity there where an indigenous tactical airlift capability could also facilitate potential access to the European Air Transport Command and the development of potential pooling and sharing arrangements with other European partners. And then if we look at the current crisis in civil aviation then, is that presenting an opportunity for procurement? Would the state benefit, for example, from a transport category jet aircraft for use in diplomatic, crisis management or non-combatant evacuation roles, or even larger helicopters for an expanded emergency aeromedical service? Similarly, the HSE is currently tendering for a 2-year, €16 million air ambulance contract. Would an appropriately equipped, state-owned and operated aircraft not be a better proposition for all of us as taxpayers? Going back to SAR and the forthcoming state contract for SAR services, Kevin, I understand if he gets online, essentially will speak to this in greater detail, but I think it's a reasonable question to ask whether a potential €600 million state contract could and should be potentially awarded to the state's own Indigenous air arm, or even any aspect of it. The state would benefit in terms of retained capability, obviously in that case, but also value for money. Essentially, you would now have a state-owned asset to be operated and maintained by individuals already on the state payroll. What about the proposed €200 million multi-role vessel? You know, recent media commentary on it has mentioned carrying helicopters on board. Will these be included in the design specification for the MRV? Will they be part of the ship's complement? What will their roles be? Will they be troop carrying helicopters for an expeditionary force, or will they support combat SAR? You know, will they be configured for humanitarian development, for example, or will they deliver aid and evacuate casualties? Or maybe they'll be expected to be all of the above, and we know ourselves that the challenges that can produce. Will there be drones involved, for example, in what role and who will operate them? So, having spoken about air capability in the context of state power projection, what about state sovereignty in Irish airspace? And the two guys have already spoken a small bit about that, but let's just kind of touch on it very, very briefly. There's two aspects to the question. First, from a state perspective, do the military have a capability to detect what is in Irish airspace? And second, if they do detect something, what are they going to do about it? Well, primary radar is required to detect an unfriendly target, and the short answer is the Defence Forces do not have an Indigenous primary surveillance radar. The elephant in the room, what machines will intercept any detected aircraft and defend our airspace? Now, in the first instance, I suppose, we need to be honest with ourselves and accept that any cost-benefit analysis in respect of fast jets or interceptors is going to pose significant challenges. We also need to be alert to, the framing of defence matters in a broader government context within a foreign policy narrative where there's a clear cosmopolitan perspective expressed through this commitment in all state documentation towards global citizenship. In this reality then, I think we need to recognise that the clear explicit commitment to an increasing ODA budget and the challenges with a diminishing defence budget, there's always going to be tension present. And again, how can we leverage that reality, I suppose, to benefit in air capability? And I suppose the key question then, just to finish on, is, in that context and against that background, as the Commission approaches, where do we want or need to position our air capability over the coming years? And that's pretty much it, Melissa.
Thank you, Niall. That's very good. Thanks very much indeed. And I'm delighted to welcome Kevin Humphreys onto the panel. Before inviting Kevin to speak, I'll just briefly give a little bit of background. He's a former Air Corps Commandant and a former Director of Safety Regulation at the Irish Aviation Authority. He's held a number of senior management positions, both in the EASA and various other organizations, including the ICAO for Accident Investigation Group, General Assembly, and high-level safety committee meetings, etc. So Kevin, his current role is to plan strategically, manage budgets and resources, motivate and manage a large, highly specialist and diverse group of aviation specialists. His professional involvement in aviation spans almost 5 decades in time and all elements and aspects of the business. He has over 7,000 hours flying experience, which includes airline experience with both Aer Lingus and Ryanair. He holds an MA from Dublin City University and has done his thesis in the Just Culture in Aviation. So Kevin, before I just hand over to you, we'll briefly go through the establishment of the Air Corps and its activities right up to the present date, and particular reference to how it has responded to any requests from the state since its foundation. Kevin.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and I'm sorry about the tech difficulties I had getting on board, and I'm sorry to have missed the earlier contributions somewhat, but I can gather what it's the route it's taking. I presume you can hear me and see me. You alluded to my career there. That stopped a couple of years ago. I'm now private aviation consultant and part-time lecturer in Carlo, and I did some in DCU as well. My main take on the air service as it was when it was established was that its first 2 missions were ostensibly, according to the history, the commonly held view was that an airplane was purchased to evacuate Michael Collins and the team should the negotiations break down. The airplane was bought through the Dublin Fire Brigade and was located at Croydon Airfield in London. It wasn't needed, and the next time the air service, as it was before the Air Corps was established, was during the Civil War, and some airplanes were still in Collinstown in Dublin, belonged to the RFC, and they were moved across or bought or purchased or loaned, and a couple of Bristol fighters. So the original mission of the air service or the Air Corps was indeed VIP transport in one sense and counterinsurgency on the others. It never really had any air defense capability. It had 4 Gloucester Gladiators, although they did a good job in Malta. They weren't much use chasing German aircraft who were detected. The British used to tell the Irish by telephone that Germans had crossed the coast, and by the time the message got to Baldonnel, the Gloucester Gladiators couldn't catch the Germans. We then got several hurricanes, and they had been mostly worn out by the RAF by the time we got them. We did have a few intercepts with these, but they didn't actually provide an air defense cover, and it wasn't until 1947 that we got Seafires, and they served quite well until the Vampire jets arrived. My point about all of this is that these were all tasks that were given to it by the state, and it did whatever it could given the resources it had. And the definition of a resilient organization is one that can take the ups and the downs, and basically that's what the whole defense forces have had to do over the years, you know, going from a build-up in the Civil War and then demobilization and then building back up in the emergency. It's exactly the same with the Air Corps. I remember a dinner in Baldonnel when 1930s pilots in the Air Corps didn't fly for 2 years because they had no oil. So that was an economic input, the whole thing. But to bring it forward to the modern era, from 1963, the Air Corps has participated in search and rescue with single-engine Alouette helicopters. When I joined in 1969, that was probably the most modern piece of equipment in the Air Corps at the time. And yet by the time within 10 years, every single airplane had been replaced. Now, the Cessnas were bought for to counteract any possible overspill from the situation in the north, and these were for Army Co-op. They provided cash escorting and Garda cooperation, all those kind of what are called aid to the civil power tasks. There was never any real projection of military power, nothing like there was a medium and recce bombing squadron, but basically it's during the war, and job was to do coastal patrols with Anson aircraft. The fighter squadron was established in 1940 with the Gloucester Gladiators, and that's why it had its that's where it got its emblem, which was a cougar, the head of a cougar, and its motto, Bioga Fiacfor. And the cynics were rather, which means small but fierce, and the cynics were rather inclined to call it Fiacfor Biog, which was fiercely small. And it suffered that kind of bad, half-baked attempt at an air force that people would tell you. But what it actually was doing was laying the foundation for the development of civil aviation. And both Michael Collins and Sean Lemass had always projected the development of international civil aviation. And during the war, both for fighter pilots and for the increase in the amount of pilots they introduced what were called short service commissions. This is basically you served for 3 years, then you served 10 years on the reserve. This enabled, because Lemass had anticipated the development of transatlantic aviation, he purchased in 1946-47 Lockheed Constellations, which gave Ireland a footprint on the Atlantic. These were bought with dollars that we had accumulated during the war because we were still in the sterling zone, and they decided how many dollars you could have. We were able to buy Constellations. And then when the service was introduced with Seaboard and Western, many pilots were transferred from the Air Corps into what was called Aer Linta Air, and it was a separate company from Aer Lingus to establish the Atlantic. So the Air Corps supplied the pilots, but unfortunately the inter-party government in 1949 decided to cancel the whole project, and we didn't get back on the Atlantic again until 1958. That was when Sean Lemass again came back in as Minister for Industry and Commerce, and he decided that we would get Boeing aircraft. Now, he was persuaded by the financial gurus to try and buy something cheaper like a Bristol Britannia, but he stuck with his project. And of course, our presence on the Atlantic is still there with the A330. During that time, in anticipation of the expansion of civil aviation, they introduced a further short service commission. They had also used a sergeant pilot scheme in the Air Corps, and a lot of these guys went on to be 747 captains. A lot of the guys were let go when the Constellations were let go and flew in various airlines around the world. In the 1950s rather, Lemass still persisted by introducing jets. So Air Corps they were the first outfit to have jets before the civil airlines. When the Dauphins were introduced, they were the first EFIS aircraft in the country. So all of the tasks that developed with our accession to the EU, we purchased the Dauphins. This was with EU money for coastal and fishery protection. That merged with the Navy and the purchase of their ships for fishery and maritime patrol. And we even had at one stage shipborne helicopter capability. Unfortunately, our search and rescue capability and our aid to the civil power was diminished. We've always had, since 1963, a certain air ambulance capability. And in fact, it was the Air Corps that developed all the landing sites at the various hospitals around the country to facilitate the arrival of the Alouette 3s in that task, and principally transferring patients from serious accidents to the National Rehabilitation Centre in Dunleary. So all this expertise and all this service has accumulated since 1963 in particular, and with the jets since 1956. This led the Air Corps then in the troubled times to build up its commitment again to pilots, and we had classes of 20 at one stage in the 1970s. Similarly to the way the Army built up its capabilities during those times. And of course, this again is the cyclical nature of the way the Defence Forces have expanded and contracted at various times, mostly to do with economic circumstances and the perceived threat. So unfortunately, the Air Corps lost its search and rescue capability for political decision, and it's been farmed out. And I think this is a considerable loss to the state and to the Defence Forces, as well as a profile that's in its essence serving its community. When you look at the contract that has been given out, it runs to, for the last 10 years, to 650 million. And if you take the purchase price of a medium lift helicopter of about 20 million, we probably could have, bought 20 helicopters and man them and maintain them and still save money. So it's, on a personal point, to me, it's the economics of the madhouse. Now, as we approach COVID and the inevitable deficit that's going to accrue, if you look at what the British are going through at the moment, talking about 400 billion, it's like the cumulative debt of 2 world wars, and we have to be planned to be repaid over 100 years or something like that. But if we're talking about deficits like that, the idea that we would pay €1 million a week to an entity to provide a service over 10 years, and with normal mission creep, this would probably end up at about $1 billion. And at the end of that period, you have nothing to show for it, in either hardware or, and given the amortization of a helicopter, we could have probably paid for these over 4 years and have had them for another 25 years. So from my point of view, it doesn't make any sense that we should persist with this looking for an outside agency to do something that we're more than capable of doing ourselves. That not only in training pilots, training crewmen, and training, again, the Air Corps stepped into the breach in the 1930s by opening an apprentice school, as did the Army. This broke the hold of the guilds on apprenticeships, and it opened it up to the average citizen. Similarly, for pilot training, there's no sponsored pilot training in Ireland except by Aer Lingus. And unfortunately, what happens there is you get people who are in their mid-30s joining the thing, with half their productive life, as far as I would be concerned, as pilots, gone. The only option for, let's say, ordinary people is to mortgage their houses or something like that, with the capital outlay of 120,000. My own personal view is that pilot as a career should be on the CAO, and so many pilots sponsored like ENAC in France. However, my main point is that with the introduction of the VIP transport with the Hawker Siddeley 125 and subsequently with the G4, these were multi-role aircraft, and the real problem for the Air Corps is being given tasks without the funding being ring-fenced, and being certain operations in the Air Corps being camels, horses designed by committee. I believe that the Air Corps, when it's asked to do something, given its helicopter, its emergency ambulance service, its Garda cooperation, these have delivered 100% reliability and dispatch reliability once the funding is ring-fenced and the thing is properly resourced. When you ask a search and rescue helicopter to double up as a parachute carrier and as a VIP transport, well, then you're not hiding to nothing. The most important point is that the taxpayers' money the defence budget should stand alone, and these tasks like search and rescue should not be funded out of defence vote. It should come from transport vote or whatever vote is responsible. And every decision that was taken in the aviation sector that involved the Air Corps was a political decision. Financial opposition was evident to every kind of initiative in military aviation. And of course, the bean counters could argue, but in my view, with this net transfer of funds of $1 million a week outside the country, it doesn't make any sense. So Shinna will.
Kevin, thank you very much indeed. And while you're been talking there, a number of questions have come in. So we'll move over to the question and answer session. And the very first question for Frank there, nice thinking outside the box with the concept of a joint UK, i.e. QRA squadron in LOSI, a la other joint squadrons. But are the existing squadrons not with other NATO nations? If so, this would be a huge diplomatic impediment to developing the concept, as Ireland's populace clearly clings dearly to its perceived neutrality. So, Frank, yeah.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned during the talk, and it's a great question, it's the key impediment, I think, but there is quite a bit of mitigation in this. The reason I mentioned that the British air defence squadrons, or the quick reaction alert interceptors, if you like, or that's not quite the same thing apparently, is their Tranche 1 squadrons. Now that means that they're purely air defence aircraft, and they are not devolved to NATO for anything else. So the other Typhoon squadrons are essentially multi-role. They're very capable air defence aircraft, but also strike aircraft, interdiction, all the other combat roles. So the idea would be you would have, it's not an idea, it's I suppose a dream in a sense, Irish pilots joining one of the dedicated air defence squadrons, which are a national asset. The way I understand it works day to day is that whilst the integrated air defence system is a NATO integrated air defence system, the air defence assets are national. So what happens when a Russian Bear appears, which is about twice a week now for the Brits, is sometimes more often they're launching, is that they get handed over these aircraft, these contacts, to the RAF and the Norwegians, usually, or the Danes sometimes, and that it then becomes a national task, and air defence is considered to be a national task, not a NATO one in practical terms. And I suppose by way of analogy, you know, if anybody were to consider a joint capability or a combined capability, then one model might be NORAD, which again isn't really, when it's part of NATO in structural terms, but practically it's a largely American but also Canadian system, whereby US and Canadian aircraft are jointly tasked under one chain of command, one set of rules of engagement. So I don't think that these constraints are. I don't think these sort of things are decided much higher level. I don't think they're I think they can be got through, and but by way of analogy to NORAD, making them a sort of UK air defence area, or whatever you'd want to call it. But directly to answer the point, the Typhoons in mind, there are two squadrons of them. They're 9 and 12, are both air defence dedicated. One of them actually is joint now with the Qataris, and you know, if you to be slightly facetious, but if you fling the Brits a little bit of cash, you could have your own British-Irish joint squadron as well on a similar basis. But I just want to add one thing, because you know what Kevin said there, and especially Niall, in terms of realities. And one of the options that I put forward are councils of perfection. And there's huge cost implications, vast cost implications in the idea of an Irish air defence squadron with Gripens or any other airframe. And it's also worth considering that your Gripen, I think I checked, is about €20,000 an hour to run. So the running costs are huge. And I think there'd be, I mean, I'm not resident in Ireland, so I don't know the political realities, but I would suspect there might be some pushback on that. And frankly, I think that an Irish Gripen squadron, or second-hand Eurofighters, or Irish indigenously made F-16s, the cost implications are just too high. You'd have to double your defence budget at least. So, I mean, you would really have to look, and there is a question later on, don't want to duplicate. The reality is there is an agreement with the Brits now. Pretty much everyone knows about it, acknowledge it. You could improve the integrated air defence system of NATO by having an improved radar system. It would be a value added. And perhaps have some Irish involvement in air crews with the RF. I think that would be the optimum solution. But anyway, that's all I have to say. I don't want to dominate the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. A number of questions have come in around the question of a reserve. And Kyriakos, I know you're a member of the major in the reserve in Greece. Perhaps you'd give some, some thoughts and comments on setting up an Air Corps reserve.
Yes, so the force in Greece works differently from other countries, I think. So in that regards, I wouldn't be the most qualified to talk about it, because the Greek defense force, the active defense force, is rather significant in numbers, and so in practice, the utilization of the reserve force is only in cases that it's really needed. So I would say for the Irish Air Corps, it would be different, because we see that there are some officers being recommissioned, mostly pilot officers, I think, which means that there is a lack of qualified people. So there is the problem of retention. There is the problem of job satisfaction, which has been identified by several surveys. The Defense Climate Survey, I think it was some years ago, identified some issues which also reflected some possible discrepancies or some concerns around safety. Overall, because I saw that there was a question about renaming the Air Corps to Air Force, it's important to know that apart from the salary or the financial issues, the job satisfaction aspect is very important for anyone working for such a technical sector of the defense force. You have to stay abreast of the development. You have to feel that you are really appreciated for what you do. You have to work with whatever is considered, state of the art. So don't underestimate that. It's important to have in mind that we're talking about human capital. Human capital needs investment. Okay, so I have seen that there are some positive developments, like the training which is happening in the US or in Australia for pilot officers of the Irish Air Corps. So that's capability which will go back, will be reinvested in the Air Corps. It's a matter which has to be assessed, I think, by any committee, by the upcoming Commission on Defense when this is formed. Without any investment in human capital, you cannot take advantage of any of the assets you have. We're talking about different capabilities. Okay, who is going to assess what kind of capabilities we need? There are different requirements, so there should be some sort of hierarchy between the requirements we have to cover as a nation here and as a state within the EU, within the broader alliance with the UK, because this is something that also anyone would have to keep in mind. So Ireland cannot operate completely dependently from the UK in that regards, due to the different threats, the magnitude of the threat, for example, and the historical links with the UK. So essentially, it's something which is, it's a positive aspect to have this connection. So overall, I would say that there needs to be more sincere discussion, and this kind of forums and this kind of webinars offer the opportunity to speak out and to talk about these issues.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe Kevin, just related to that, do you see staying with the reserve, an opportunity to make it more active and relevant, leveraging all those pilots that are still flying, with Air Corps experience for Aer Lingus and Ryanair, and their knowledge and management skills?
Well, the Air Corps had a reserve. It had a reserve from post-war until the end of the short service commissions. And one of the problems with the reserve was, remember now, you have an open door policy in Australia where people are on the reserve and they serve in Afghanistan, they serve in any theatre, and they have served in every theatre with the US since 1943. And these people, for example, if you live in Australia, you have a perceived threat, a real threat, and you've joined up with AUSUS, with the US and Australia, to assess the threat from that part of the world, and they're building bases all up along the same island route that they took to invade Japan. So they have a very real threat. The United States, you have the Air National Guard, which are mostly reservists, but they're required to do exactly the same training and the same gunnery practice and the same range practices as the regulars. So in the Air Corps, the guys would come back up for 10 years, for 3 weeks a year, but the most you could get out of them was probably they'd relieve you from doing orderly officer or something, and which was very welcome. But there wasn't enough flying for them to go around. There wasn't enough flying for us, and there was a huge training program. Some of them were utilized as mentors on our transport aircraft because they were current chief training captains on the Boeing and stuff like that. And that was useful, but wasn't structured. And even to maintain ratings, we had one reservist who became our examiner as an external examiner on one of the aircraft. But I would say that to get employers to release their pilots for military operations for, say, a couple of months a year or a couple of weeks a year did not work. And unless you're in a genuinely threatened situation, as I say, like the Australians, and even, I mean, I understand that reservists from the UK are being sent. Now, I know there's a considerable restructuring of what we called on Caidlín Cooltaka, which was the first line of reserve. And the last time it was called up was in 1969. I did some dreadful pioneer work there myself as a cadet with the refugee situation. But we haven't had a threat like that since. And I think the question is, what is the threat and what are we defending? Now, I would say something about the permission or the tacit understanding that the Typhoons can enter our airspace to intercept something off the West Coast, but that's more to do with 9/11 and the threat of a weaponized passenger aircraft maybe being launched at a particular site in the UK, that it would have to be passed through here. I don't think it's based on the concept of the Typhoons defending our airspace against an aggressor. The bears have been coming around since the 1960s, and they used to be intercepted by lightnings and all kinds of stuff based up and phantoms based up in the UK. So as I say, it's the same old story. The interesting thing is the Norwegians, my understanding, are out every night checking on the bears, but they're using F-22s. Which, you know, I mean, even one F-22 would probably bust our budget. So I think we have to deal with the grim realities. And there's a very famous quote about policy decisions, which I'd like to make, and that is that politicians must make decisions, and policy making cannot be left to the dismal science of economists, nor the invisible hand of the market. Clinton's advisor Stiglitz used to say there was no invisible, the invisible hand was invisible because it wasn't there. And that certain activities, with not a question of either or, private or public, there are certain things that have to be left to the public sector, and trying to privatize activities is thing. And I think that we need political decisions to decide what we want from our defense forces, what way they're going to be structured, what way they're going to be funded. And I don't think anybody who's ever been in the FCA or in the defense forces ever had a bad day in it. It's something, you know, being in the military is something that leaves an imprint on you for the rest of your life. A realistic defense, the reserve deploying some of the second line second line to the foreign operations, I think is a great idea, but they should be supported by perhaps our own helicopter elements. The head of the Norwegian accident investigation was a helicopter pilot that supported our troops in the Congo. So if that isn't a precedent that we should learn from, that we should really, if our troops are deployed in any military expansion, we should perhaps be supporting the troops on the ground with helicopters and CSAR and stuff like that, rather than the concept of having a couple of squadrons of interceptors like a Typhoon, who would have to be replaced soon anyway, and probably by unmanned aircraft. So I think that area is so expensive and it's so technically complex. And as I say, I don't think we have a real threat. If we did have a threat, we'd be joined with the EU, I suspect.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So Niall, a question from Jerry Waldron there. Do you think that a strategic airlift rather than intercept is a key capability to invest in for the state, given our stated foreign policy and our commitment to being a good global citizen?
To be honest, yeah, I think that's I'm conscious of, say, some of your previous panelists, and I remember, listen to, say, Brian Hayes in particular, and he had a particular view of, let's call it the defense sector. And it just struck me that there is, that people are quite reticent to invest significant amounts in, let's call it the defense or peace. And maybe that's not a level of discomfort, or reflects a level of discomfort of lack of knowledge of what defense is about. But if we look at what the state needs, or how the state views themselves, that's where the state is probably going to invest. And it strikes me that in certainly most of the foreign policy literature over the last number of years, and again, informed by, I suppose, the whole triple lock mechanism piece, that there's a concept of self in Ireland. I think that, that we are good global citizens. We do contribute to the world in a positive way. We like to think of ourselves as humanitarians who want to make a difference in a constructive way. So in that context, then, I would ask, say, well, how can we as military people contribute in that space? And, obviously we've got a long and, I suppose, storied history as peacekeepers. And then I would like to say, well, okay, well, how can people in the air domain, or how can we add an air capability to that space? And it makes sense to me that we would have a lift capability in order to contribute in that regard. And that lift capability can be used either to support our peacekeepers, bring them into theatre if needs be, non-combatant evacuation operations like we did at the early stages of Libya, and we also did it in Lebanon. And, so we can make a tangible difference in that space. Whether it's strategic lift or whether it's tactical lift, I would argue strategic lift in the first stages can be potentially expensive, especially if we're buying the 295s at the moment in a maritime role. There's obviously a cargo version of the 295. You wouldn't have to cross-train crews, anything like that. There's good synergies to be explored there. 295 tactical lift capability can be deployed into unprepared strips, etc. Very, very capable machine. And not only that, it's on the palette, if you like, within the EATF. So if you contribute X number of hours on X machine, there's a chance to trade up for X number of hours or Y number of hours, if you like, on another machine. So I would see, for me personally, if I was spending money per se, I would look at it and say, you know what, as a state, where is our strategic need? What's our concept of self? And the whole narrative around our engagement on the Security Council and how we won that seat and the values that brought us to that point. And again, even thinking of the Navy in the Mediterranean over the last number of years, the stuff that people got or that made a difference to the citizens who weren't necessarily familiar with the military environment was the humanitarian piece, and how the military represented them as citizens in that space. And in that context, for me, I would say, well, you know what, a lift capability that would enable us to, let's say, project ourselves into that space, ourselves as citizens into that space and make a difference, that's something worthwhile. I think that, where, let's call it an intercept capability in broad terms, the other panelists have spoken to that. It's an expensive game, inverted commas, to get into. Sustaining it, maintaining it, and working with it in the long term is exceedingly expensive. And the value proposition there, you know, it wouldn't take long before citizens started to question the value proposition. So, you know, I would say that for me, I would rather look at projecting ourselves using a lift capability than an intercept capability.
Very good. So a question that's come in, not on the Q&A here. I'm just wondering who I should aim this one to. But the question is, do we need to be far more creative? I mean, Frank, you started off with some creative thinking in our thinking. And for example, move the Air Corps lock, stock and barrel to Shannon as a joint civil military airport, set up an industry centre of excellence along the model of the recent Jaguar Land Rover investment, and sell Baldonnel at market rates, and use the money for investment in aircraft. Now, maybe I'll throw that one back at you, and then while the other thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's there's a couple of things in that. I think first of all, the idea of using Shannon as a kind of investment hub or a hub for hothousing industry associated with aviation. I think, for me personally, I think that's an excellent idea. There's significant tax benefits, obviously, that can be accrued down that area. You've got, as Kyriakos will tell you, an excellent college, one of the top aeronautical schools in the country, just in the road. So there's huge synergies that can be explored down there. Lots of real estate at the edge of Europe, clear skies all around you. The airport's at sea level, etc., etc. Massive advantages there. So is that a good idea of its own? Absolutely it is. Should it be pursued? No question about it. In terms of the real estate in Baldonnel then, I think if we just reframe what Baldonnel is, you know, Baldonnel is a strategic state asset on the edge of the capital city. That having that is, you know, really, really beneficial to the state. It's a secure airport. It's got access to all the main arteries, M50, M4, M7, all there. So in that context, it's too valuable from a strategic perspective to sell it to the highest bidder. However, is there an opportunity to sweat that asset to maybe benefit the state or Baldonnel to a greater extent? There potentially is. And I'll give you a parallel example. RAF Northolt, just on the fringes of London. Would somewhere like Baldonnel benefit from, let's say, being a civil military airport, i.e. having been able to cope with, say, business jet traffic, having a separate ramp for business jet traffic, and then the money that would accrue, if you like, from the fees and charges associated with running that business, could that be potentially reinvested into Baldonnel, upgrading the airfield, investing more in infrastructure, etc., etc.? There is a business case to be put that would actually, you know, those business passengers whose time is valuable, you know, you could land a Gulfstream 4 in there without any difficulty, and they have immediate access to the road network that I spoke about previously, or a heliport to bring them to wherever they were conducting their business. So from that point of view, I would think it's essential Baldonnel remains a strategic state asset. I think that there is potential to sweat that asset a bit more in order to invest more in the state's air capability. But that said, I also see the merits in having, separate to the Air Corps, an aviation cell, if you want to call it that, or an aerospace kind of hothouse piece based out of Shannon Airport. Yeah,
so maybe just picking up on that and developing that a bit further. Somebody else has come in here with Kevin. I mean, this is something you know a bit more about. You actually, I think, mentioned, was it the ENAC in is that based in Toulouse? Are you familiar with that?
Me, Kevin?
Yeah.
No. Oh, that's the Airbus military construction, is it? I think that's in Toulouse, is it?
Okay, well, so the question is
Airbus military.
Yeah, it's in different locations in Europe, Germany, for example.
Okay, but maybe I suppose to bring it back, you know, a national centralized aviation university, training both civilian and military on all aspects: pilots, controllers, designers, aircraft maintenance.
Oh, sorry. I understand what you meant now. I mentioned ENAC,
ENAC,
which
yeah.
is the École Nationale for Civil Aviation. But that's just for pilots, as far as I understand. And of course, when the downturn came after the first oil crisis, there were kind of jokes about why are we training pilots. The French system is completely different now to anywhere else. As you know, it's the state funds everything. I have just some discussions with Michael O'Leary, and he was talking about things, and he said, "Well, Air France didn't do this," and I said, "But Air France is not just an airline. Air France is a country, to be quite honest, and it doesn't operate the way a normal commercial airline operates, I would argue." But the interesting thing is that you're talking about when Baldonnel, when the air service started in Baldonnel, it was a civil and military operation. It was the Irish Air Service, and in the 1920s, the Irish Aero Club, where all the great civilian flyers like Lady Mary Heath and people like that, they all operated from there, and Kildonan, and the whole civil aviation, private and civil aviation, very many people got involved in it because it was so romantic. Gogarty used to fly there. He told Joyce that he could get an army airplane and meet him in London. Northolt is interesting because it was a fighter base, and a Polish and Czech fighter base in the war. And then it's where 32 Squadron operate the VIP transport, and that's where we integrated with them. But the idea of, it was mooted that Baldonnel be opened up for commercial jets. As far as I remember, Tony Ryan wanted to land his jet there when he landed in Castle Lyons. But the opposition from the four main problems facing the aviation sector are the economy, security, and laterally the environment. Safety comes in, but really it's the main drivers at the moment that are causing the main troubles for the aviation industry are economic, security, and the environment. And the environment is increasingly going to cause trouble for the aviation sector. But the noise element is one of the things, and you know that in Germany you can't start an APU before 7 o'clock in the morning. You would be fined a couple of $100 immediately. People forget that Heathrow closes at 11 and doesn't open until 5. This is increasingly a thing, and this is why there was no further development of this concept at Baldonnel, because of the environmental aspect. Interestingly, Shannon, we tried several times to have an eco aviation system in Shannon, but there are an awful lot of vested interests, and full cooperation between what I would perceive to be competitive interests is always a problem when you're trying to have this. There was proposed a transition center at Shannon where all the local industries would feed into it, but it's still up for grabs. That it's a good idea to have this concept of a total aviation environment. I suspect that should this pandemic work its way out, please God, I suspect that the larger airlines like Ryanair will probably look at its own academies and potential tie up with a university. I suspect that's on the way. They have hundreds of graduates working on other aspects apart from the pilot and engineering side.
Okay, we're getting very close to the end, but there's one more topic I'd just like to throw in, and maybe Frank, somebody here has asked in terms of modern technology-driven solutions such as AI-enabled unmanned UAVs, and also maritime surveillance and space-based surveillance capabilities. Frank, would you like to maybe unmute there and
yeah, it's serendipitous because I really wanted to mention that whatever we speak about fighters or this airframe or that airframe, the future is in space AI, and a combination of that with unmanned systems, UAVs, RPAS, and so forth. And that's something we haven't touched on. I noticed some of the questions have, and we could talk about that all day and all night. But another way of looking at the strategic aviation future of Ireland is as a centre of excellence, but as a centre of excellence looking out a decade, 2 decades, which are going to be dominated, particularly in the surveillance domains. On operations, by the way, with the Army, you are going to find yourself behind if you don't have an indigenous or at least an organic UAV support system. And AI, of course, in Ireland, with its superb technological base, is exceptionally well placed to develop those. And that's looking out a decade or so. And that's where we talk about creative solutions to basing and to some extent industrial base. But in terms of the intellectual and conceptual basis, we need to start lifting ourselves up beyond the classic airframes, way above that. As I say, UAVs, space, AI, and let's not forget that Ireland also receives a great many subsurface assets onto its shores, and that element of defence, I understand, is entirely ignored. You have to make your strategic selections, but 10 years' time, this discussion will be very different.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're actually up almost at 8:30, and I did promise that I would invite each of you to make a concluding remark. So maybe we go in reverse order. Kevin, is there anything you'd like to say briefly before we finish?
Well, it's said all over the place that Ireland punches way above her weight in the aviation world. She revitalized the and worked on the whole leasing concept, and has created a center of excellence in that. Just briefly, Ireland tried to arm herself. Frank Aiken was the Minister for Defence in 1939 and 1940, but we were prohibited from getting airplanes and artillery for fear that we might use them in a disadvantageous way towards our nearest neighbours. Personally, I think Ireland is not in the big power game. The same Frank Aiken introduced the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in the United Nations with Freddie Boland, and I think that's the way Ireland perceives herself, as Niall was saying. As the problem for us, of course, is that we don't have the budgets, and we don't have the population, and we don't have the resources to get into heavy Typhoon or Rafale type aircraft. And I think our capability should be focused on serving the common good, supporting our ground forces when abroad, and supporting the humanitarian mission.
Thank you. Niall.
Again, I'd agree with Kevin's comments there, and I also think that's a key enabler, if you like, to upskill people, make a difference in terms of, Kyriakos spoke there about in terms of regulation, all of that stuff. There are a number of, I suppose, former military pilots in a number of positions in industry who are very interested in contributing in a constructive way to their alma mater. And whether that's in terms of supporting the people in terms of upskilling, looking at things in different ways, bringing in enterprise culture, etc., etc. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, but trying to add value and give something back to the organization. And in that context, I think that the concept of an Air Corps Reserve is a very cheap and easy option to action in the short term that would allow or free up some space for the Air Corps to pursue capability development in other areas. And to pick a simple example, whether it's, if someone decided that they were available for, one maritime patrol a month, or if someone was able to do a shift as over a weekend as an EAS pilot out in Athlone, that could potentially free up capacity in other areas for people to do, or people could contribute to think pieces, thought papers, etc., etc. So I think that there's a lot of untapped knowledge and experience that people would like to offer in a constructive way. And I think that the door through which that could happen is actually through some form of Air Corps reserve.
Thank you, Niall, very much. Kyriakos?
Yes, so Niall has summarized pretty much the main points I would like to offer as key takeaways as well. So investment needs to happen, definitely. It's happening at some extent. So there are new platforms, new technical capabilities being introduced in the Air Corps. There is training which is happening outside the borders of Ireland. There are pilots being trained in Alabama. There are pilots being trained in Australia as well. So there should be a separate, part of investment happening on the human capital, not only in terms of building up the knowledge or building up the skills of engineers and pilots, but also modernizing the organizational structure. So there are good examples, there are bad examples. One of the bad examples which I typically use is the example of the regulatory reform which happened after the Nimrod accident in the UK. That was a major event and they had to revisit the whole organization. Fortunately, we don't have the Nimrod here in terms of a very bad situation we have to resolve, but we have to be prepared. The loss of technical integrity, for example. So when we lose that, it's very difficult to go back and to reverse it. For that, you would need to do some rethinking on how you would like to organize the Air Corps. It's a small unit, okay, but there are issues, so you have to go back and see what you need to improve. There are different ways to do that. You have your own expertise as an organization, but also you have all this expertise which is outside the organization, which are ex-officers, people that have worked for this organization. They have gained a lot of experience from the civil sector, from other industries, from other countries. So that's very, very valuable. And it's also the civil industry, the civil aviation industry. So we have to see more interaction. We have to see more linking with what is happening in major parts of the industry, not the leasing sector so much, because even the leasing sector, someone can say, can lend their expertise in terms of contract management, how you do the transition of aircraft. So there is a lot of things that you can get from them, but also the design sector, the continuing worthiness management sector. There are some companies which are subcontractors to major OEMs. We need to see more of that. Hopefully, in the future, there may be an OEM on this part of the island as well. Effectively, one of the things that I mentioned is that we need to see more open-minded people within the Defense Force, within the Ministry of Defense, and to open up this discussion more broadly. We have universities, we have research organizations. These are already, in the business of being open for collaboration. We collaborate with multinationals already. We haven't seen the similar thing happening for the Defense Force, not only the Air Corps, but also the other branches of the Defense Force. So all this has to be rethought and have to be put in this context, I think, overall. That's my, I would say, my single takeaway. More collaboration, more interaction. That's definitely for the best.
Thank you. And Frank, final word to you.
Yes, I'd like to just echo there what Kyriakos said about cooperation and just make one economic point further to what Niall started out with his presentation. The truth is, if you want to have an organic sovereign air defense capability, you're going to look at about £2 billion, euros, whatever, a large amount of money for a decade. And realistically, let's accept that's not going to happen. And therefore, cooperation, perhaps with the closest friends, allies, and partners might not be or shouldn't be out of the range of consideration. Just one final point. The conceptual component of air power can leverage, or should leverage, Ireland's immense intellectual capital and the huge skills and advantages offered by your brain power. And that conceptual component must include space, AI, cyber, and subsurface. And it doesn't need to be very expensive.
Thank you very much. So all that remains basically is for me to draw to a close, a little bit over past 8:30, but I think it's been very, very interesting. And thank you all again for giving your time and your contribution this evening. And we look forward to talking to you all again some point in the not too distant future. In the next couple of weeks, we expect that the commission will be announced, and it'll be interesting to see what air capability or sorry, who on the commission will have the air capability responsibility as well. So thank you all again, and to all our attendees for this evening. And anyone who wants to catch up again or review, hopefully we'll have this on YouTube in a couple of days. But good night all, and take care.